What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Jones, and today we are in a new podcast studio. And it's been a while since I put a podcast out, so I'm really excited to be here, really excited to record this one. I appreciate you guys for being here and for listening. I hope you like the show, and I hope you get something out of it. So first, to get things out of the way, I'm going to be recording a lot more podcasts in the future. So if you do enjoy this podcast or you've enjoyed our previous podcast with a lot of the awesome guests we've had on, I would appreciate it if you would like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow, helps me know what you like, and helps you see future episodes. With that said, this is going to be a solo podcast today. I've got a good amount that I want to talk about. It probably won't be too long, but we are going to have more guests on in the future. I've got a few lined up already, so I'm really excited. If you know a guest you'd like to see on or you would like to be a guest, feel free to DM me on Instagram. Might not be the best move because my DMs are kind of flooded, but you can send me an email, justin@assembleperformance.com, and that will be in the description as well, so that way you can see that. Okay, so in this podcast, I wanted to do a little update on where life has been the last few months and on the podcast specifically, what you can expect, what the schedule is going to look like for now. And if you couldn't tell by the title of the podcast, it's on returning to running after injury. So I'm going to explain a little bit of my experience, a good bit of my experiences with running injuries and returning to running after injuries and kind of what the future looks like, because I just came off of a period of having an injury that came up out of nowhere. So I'll explain a little bit more about that and what you do want to do and don't want to do when you're returning from running injury or really any injury. A lot of this advice is pretty broad and general for any injury, not specifically running, but today's focus will be on running. So some of it will be specifically on running. So also, I just finished a lactate threshold heart rate test this morning, got up at 4 a.m. and it's about 8:30 in the morning. So I am tired. So I apologize if I sound a little tired. I do have my third cup of coffee today at 8:30. So yeah, I had a cup of coffee before I ran and then one when I got here to set up. And then I just poured this one for the podcast. So hopefully I'll be awake. A lot of caffeine. Yeah, that might be a problem. But anyways, so yeah, if you've never done a lactate threshold heart rate test, LTHR, they're not fun. It's basically 30 minutes all out effort, and then you measure your heart rate. And so doing that at 4:30 this morning was not very enjoyable, but got it done. Got in here. I like getting stuff done in the morning because then that's my win for the day. I got my training session in, and then the rest of the day, that momentum carries it throughout the rest of the day. So it's worth it to me, but I am fairly tired this morning because it took it out of me this morning. It was humid and I'm pretty tired. But anyways, updates on where things have been. Haven't done a podcast in a while. I believe it's been like 3 or 4 months. I haven't checked, but I believe it's been 3 or 4 months. I checked the other day and saw, but it's been a while. So I got out of the Navy and I had a pretty hectic transition out of the Navy. But yeah, had a pretty hectic transition out of the Navy. Not bad things at all, but I thought I would be less busy since I would have more time to work on the business and more time to be home, but I actually became way more busy than I thought I was going to be. And so I just kind of needed to take a step back a little bit from the long form content from YouTube and the podcast just to focus on other business tasks, other life tasks, other family tasks. And so that's where I've been. I appreciate your patience. I know there are a good amount of you that reached out asking if I was good, where the podcast was. There was even a period of time where I wasn't posting a ton on Instagram either. But I'm through that now. I've figured out kind of the systems that I need to have in place for my new schedule and just how busy things are. And so we're going to be back on the podcast, and I would like to eventually be back on YouTube. But the biggest thing to avoid when you make any life change is going from nothing to all out. You want to make kind of a gradual change. That's just a behavior change 101. So I'm going to start out with a more conservative podcast schedule and then eventually get into YouTube and then increase as I have the time and as I want to. Because the last thing I want to do is make this podcast or YouTube, things that I both really enjoy doing, something that I hate because I'm just too busy and burnt out. So with that said, I'm going to shoot for roughly a podcast every 4 weeks. Sometimes it might be 3 weeks, depending on guest schedules and such. But I'm going to shoot right now for at least the next few podcasts for a podcast every 3 to 4 weeks. And then as I get back into the swing of things, I would like to bring that down to every 2 weeks and then every week again, because I do really enjoy recording these. But I just know that if I do all of it at once and just go all the way back into one every week, that's just going to be too much. I'm going to burn out and I'm going to start to hate the thing that I love, which is not what I want to do. I really enjoy making these for you guys and answering your questions. And so with that said, expect a podcast every 3 to 4 weeks for now, and I will keep you updated. And I'm going to be more active on Instagram. I have been more active on Instagram. I'll be more active on my stories. So I'll post some question stickers every now and then. So you can answer those questions if you have questions for the podcast, and you can DM me as well. I typically do my DMs in one batch per day. I do get a lot of DMs, so I apologize if I don't get back to it right away, but I do aim to get back to every single DM I get. Sometimes they get stuck in my requests, and then I don't see it for a week or so because I check that every so often and then see somebody legitimate DM'd me in the list of spam DMs that are also put in the DM requests. All right, so yeah, with that said, for this first podcast, it probably won't be super long. We'll see where it goes. I didn't really do a lot of prep for this. I just wanted to get on. I wanted to try out the new podcast studio, the new mics, the new setup. And I also wanted to just get on and kind of share where I've been and the emotions around returning to running after injury, because I am just coming back from an injury. And then this also gives me a chance to figure out the tech, because of this new, there's a little bit of tech changes. So took me a while to get that set up actually this morning. Even though I'm a tech person, there's a little bit of a learning curve there, but I think we got it. All right, so first, before we get into this returning to running after injury, I just do have to preface this with the fact that I'm not a physical therapist or a doctor. Some injuries do require seeing a physical therapist or a doctor. I do know a ton of really great physical therapists. I've had a few on the podcast, a handful of physical therapists that are really great. There are a lot of really great physical therapists that I know in the Virginia Beach area and remote. So some injuries do require getting that professional help. Some injuries, the coach and athlete can kind of just work through from a load management and a training perspective, but it's up to the context of the injury. It really depends on the athlete, the context of the injury, how severe it is. There are really great PTs and doctors out there that can help you as well. So I am not trying to take that role at all. I'm just sharing what I've learned through my personal experience and through coaching athletes and through networking with really great physical therapists in the realm of college sports, in the realm of private practice, and even in the clinical setting. There have been some awesome physical therapists on the podcast so far. I would say physical therapists have been the number one type of guest I've had on. So if you are interested in learning more about that, there is a few different episodes on training, on running specifically. There's one on running and injuries. So definitely go back and listen to those. But for me, I'm just coming off of a foot injury, and that was a very interesting one, which I'll talk about in a minute. That was during a prep for a 60K. And then last year, I was prepping for the same 60K, and I had a hip injury. I was also traveling for work. I had a lot of life stress on top of that, and I wasn't able to do the 60K. I may have been able to, I'm pretty confident I could have just grinded my teeth and done it, but that would have just resulted in more long-term issues with my hip. Most likely, I can't say for sure, but I just knew I wanted to get that healed up. And I was already traveling for work out of state. I couldn't do the race I was going to do. So we'll get into all of that. But starting out with my experience, the 60K, 2 years ago, the 60K prep, I was increasing my mileage. Things were going well, strength training around increasing my mileage. And then I went on a last minute work trip that I didn't really have a say in. I did kind of, but it was kind of one of those things where it was going to be a good experience for a work trip. And so I went. It was a 2-month work trip, and it happened to be over the time that the 60K was. So I wasn't going to be able to participate in the race. I went up to Maryland, and so I decided, okay, that's fine. I'm going to do a self-supported 60K, not in the race. I'll just do it on the trails up there and have a good time and still train for it. And that was the plan. So I got up there and then started working like 12 to 15-hour days. Lots of stress from that regard. The gym I was going to was a fairly small gym, lots of influencers, which is fine, but it was a very busy gym, kind of small, very nice equipment. And so there was a little bit of stress around that. And then the work environment was just kind of not the best. I was sitting all day, which is not great for my hip. My left hip, I have problems. I've had problems since I was in the Navy. I had some stuff with my hip that just hasn't gone away. And so it's kind of been a game of management around that and what can I do, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I was sitting all day, and it really started to flare up on my long runs. I think I did like a 20-mile run one Saturday, which it was also really cold. Coming up from going to Maryland from Virginia Beach, I want to say it was like 27. I did not bring clothes for that, so those were some rough runs. But anyways, it started to flare up, and then I just had to have a talk with my coach. I was like, hey, I'm still here for a while. I'm not able to do the race. Like, I would rather just regroup and do the race next year and not, further cause problems with my hip, because I've had problems in the past. I kind of know how it goes, and I just was like, we need to take a step back from a load perspective, from a mileage perspective, and regroup. And so that's what we did. I called off the self-supported race, and the race director had actually already deferred my race to next year which was this year, because I was gone and I had no say in it. And I emailed him and said, hey, I'm gone. Can I do a virtual race? And he was like, I'll just defer it. That's fine. You can do it next year. So that really resulted in kind of a negative spiral mentally that I didn't realize, because I had this 60K I was really training for. I didn't really have anything else lined up for the rest of the year yet. I was going to do the 60K and see how I felt. all of a sudden that was gone. And something I've learned and relearned about myself a ton is that I always need something to train for. Not from like I need this or I'm going to go crazy, but it's just like that's what makes me the most happy is training for an event. I love training in general, but training for an event specifically is something that I really enjoy, which I will probably get into when we talk about this last 60K. But I really went into a negative spiral mentally, had a hard time just training in general because I was like, what am I training for? Obviously, there's general health. And so that kind of kept me somewhat consistent. But that general phase of like just trying to stay fit and healthy and not training for something competitive isn't where I'm at my best. It isn't where I feel my best. It isn't where I feel most alive. And so I went through kind of a negative mental spiral there that took me a little while to get out of. And if you go back on my Instagram, and my YouTube, you can see the gap there where I was just kind of going through it and I wasn't really posting anything. So that was kind of a crappy time, and I didn't really come out of it until I decided to train for something again. And I believe it was just around the same time that the 60K was going to come up again. So I said, all right, like let's go back into prep for that. I kind of went through this very hectic general phase for probably 3 or 4 months where I would hit 3 to 4 to maybe even 5 and sometimes 6 workouts a week. But most of the time it was like 3 to 4 workouts a week. I felt pretty crappy about training. Work was really, really busy by my own doing. I took on a lot more than I should have. So that was me. But yeah, and then I kind of got out of it when the 60K came back around again. So then that brings us to this year. Well, late last year, I really started pushing business growth, which you can see if you look at my Instagram and YouTube and the podcast. Things got a lot more professional. So that was really great. And I really had that to push for as well, which was awesome. And it's been really good. I've brought on a lot more athletes, had a really good time working with some really awesome one-to-one athletes. And I really, really love those relationships. So I really started pushing business growth. The 60K came back around and I started training for that again. I started working from home, which was actually detrimental for me mentally because I wouldn't leave the house. I would train and work and that was it. And so running on the weekends was really my escape, my time to just mentally decompress, my long runs on the weekends, and things were going really good. Before we get into my injury, the injury from the year before, from last year, 60K makes sense. I had a lot of work stress, a lot of environment changes. I was traveling away from family, lots of stuff compounding. And it's like, okay, that makes sense that you got injured. You were up in your mileage around all this life stress that all kind of happened at once, and that all compounded. So that makes sense. This injury was a little different, this foot injury. I don't know what it was. I didn't go to the doctor for it. I was getting out of the Navy, and the whole healthcare thing was like I was getting off TRICARE, getting on my civilian insurance, and trying to figure all that out. So I didn't go to the doctor for it in that interim because I just needed to be medically cleared off to get out because I was ready to get out. So I actually didn't have a lot of change the few weeks of my foot injury leading up to it. There wasn't a lot of change. I didn't increase mileage a lot. I didn't increase training load a lot. It was really kind of a steady few weeks. Like I think my mileage was exactly the same the 3 weeks leading up to my foot injury. Life stress was actually really low. I was working from home other than having a young child. So sleep was kind of messed up, but sleep had been messed up for a little while. It wasn't like right after he was born or anything. And so everything was fine. And if you look at all the metrics, like I wasn't super stressed. I wasn't increasing training load at all, even really, maybe, like 0.5%, a percent, but not a ton. And so then I went on a run on a Tuesday and I went out from my house. I went on the same route I always do. It was really pretty sunset on Tuesday. So I went out, wore my Saucony endorphins. I love those. Saucony, however you say it. But I wore my endorphins. I really love those shoes. And the run was great. Got back fine. Saturday rolls around and I go out for, I think it was a 9 or 10 mile run. It wasn't like a 15, 20 mile run, but it wasn't like a 3 or 4 mile run, And I went out with the same exact shoes on the same exact route. I was super chill, not stressed at all that morning because it was the perfect running weather. My favorite running weather it was like 55 degrees. The dew point was like 60 or below, like super nice. There's some mist in the air from the dew like evaporating or whatever. Not a lot of people out. I was up early and it was just one of those euphoric runs where I was like, this is going to be like the best time of this whole week for me. So I get out and I get about 4 miles in and my left foot starts to hurt on the outside of my foot. And I've had that before when I tie my shoes too tight. So I get down and I untie my shoe, take my foot completely out of the shoe. I undo all the laces and then I put it back on looser. And that normally solves it. It's normally a blood flow thing. So yeah, if you have an issue like that, it can be because your shoes are too tight. One of the tricks that I like to do is curl my toes up when I tie my shoes. That way when I uncurl my toes, I have a little extra room there. So that's something you can try. But anyways, I kept running and it still hurt, and I just kept pushing. I was like, nah, it'll be fine. Like I literally did this exact run just a little bit shorter. Like the terrain isn't different, the shoes aren't different, nothing is different. So I'm running through all this stuff in my head trying to problem solve. Like, no, don't freak out, because freaking out makes it hurt worse. Like pain doesn't always equal injury, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then I hit the turnaround point. Well, I didn't hit the turnaround point. I turned around early because I was like, this is actually really bothering me. But I just kind of toughed it out. And I was like, I'm going to run back to the rubberized track and just run circles for the rest of my run on the rubberized track because it's softer. This might be like a weird asphalt thing. So I get back to the track, stop, and I can run fine. It hurts, but I can run fine. But I literally am limping when I'm walking. So I'm like, okay, that's not very good. So I literally run 1.5 laps on the track, and I cannot do it. I'm limping, and I'm like, this is not great. So I jog back to the house, which is about under a quarter mile. I want to say it's like 200 or 300 meters from the track, which is super nice. I'm really, really, really fortunate to live that close to the rubberized track, because in our area, we don't have a lot of rubberized tracks. So I get there and I change my shoes. I say, I'm going to change my shoes. I take the shoes off. I'm like limping. I sit down for a minute and put my foot up on the bench in our home gym and just kind of like get off my feet for a little bit. And then I put my other shoes on, which are the, I think, Saucony Rides. So they have a similar heel toe drop. They just don't have the plate, the carbon fiber plate, and they don't have the fancy new foam. But I put those on, literally run down to the end of the street, and I'm like, I can't do this. This hurts so bad. So I limp inside, and for, I want to say a few weeks after that, I like limped around all day. I have no idea what it was. It doesn't make any sense. I didn't increase my training volume at all. I wasn't stressed out. Like all the things that you look for from a load management and stress perspective didn't make sense. So I was not happy with that, obviously. I couldn't do the 60K. I couldn't even really walk normally for a while. Now I'm fine, but I'm on the cusp of fine. Like it still bothers me every now and then, but it's not like horrible. I'm still able to run, but it was pretty frustrating because I trained really hard. I was really excited for the 60K, and I was, I didn't do it this year. So I kind of went into another negative mental spiral, but I had a lot more tools now because I had learned a lot from the previous injury, and I had learned a lot from the PTs. I met a lot of really good PTs, but in the time between there, specifically Mitchell Tanner and Katie Dabrowski helped me a ton on just understanding like self-compassion around injury, and then also kind of the pain science behind things. So Katie Dabrowski, I had her on the podcast before. I actually went to her seminar in North Carolina. She's still having them all year, called Training Equals Healthcare. And she used to be a neuroscientist before she was a physical therapist. And so she goes deep into pain science and kind of like the psychology behind pain, which is super cool, super interesting to me because I'm a nerd. But yeah, so for the rest of the podcast, I want to talk about kind of the do's and don'ts around injury, what I did and didn't do, what I've learned and relearned, because the funny thing is a lot of the stuff I know as a coach, and it's second nature for me to coach people on it. But then when it comes to my own life, it's hard to read the label from inside the box is what people say. And I say it a good amount because it's so funny, because somebody will say something to me and it's something that I already coach people on, but they'll say it to me and I'll be like, oh yeah, like duh. And then it's like, why didn't I think of that? Because I literally tell other people that. So sometimes just getting that third party perspective really helps. But anyways, I want to go into the do's and don'ts around injuries, and then kind of what my plan is for the future now that I'm getting back into the swing of running. And so I have a list here of things to avoid. And so things to avoid when you get an injury. This is, again, a mixture of things that I've known, things that I've known but not had good words for and have learned from other professionals, and things that I've just learned from other professionals. Like I've mentioned a lot of them already, had a lot of them on podcast. And so I really want to just express my gratitude to those other professionals. So the things to avoid, the first one would be detraining. So when you get injured, it's sometimes you can't do the activity like running, so you have to completely stop. But then you're going to get detrained. You're going to lose conditioning in the muscles around wherever the injury is, and also cardiovascularly if it's running, swimming, cycling. And so you want to avoid detraining, which is going to mean that you have to do what you can. So if you can't run, like I couldn't run, cycling is a good thing. Swimming is a good thing. I didn't swim, but swimming is a good thing. Cycling is a good low impact cardio, ensuring you're still strength training. So what I did do while I wasn't able to run was I cycled on the indoor trainer, and I also strength trained a lot and focused on my lower legs a lot to try to just strengthen up those tissues and avoid as much deconditioning as I could. The second thing to avoid is fear. Fear is an interesting one because we could talk for hours with Katie or other professionals on pain science, because pain science is it's a rabbit hole. You could really go down pain science. But generally, if you're afraid of something, it's going to heighten your response to it. So I guess a better way to say this would be, Your body doesn't have specific receptors for like water, right? Your body says it has temperature sensors and other receptors, and so when there's a change that's big enough, it says, "Oh, like this must be water," which is true. There's things you can trick yourself with where you can touch something and you think it's water if you're not looking at it, but then you look at it and it's something else. So for pain, a lot of pain is the body just saying, okay, here's our homeostasis, here's where we normally are, and this has left my threshold of what's normal, and so something is different, and so I'm going to perceive this as pain. That's a simplification. A lot of this is a simplification to avoid going down the rabbit hole, but when it comes to something like an injury, you get a pain, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that there's injury. It could be injury. It could be not. There's a lot of injuries that are asymptomatic, and there's a lot of symptoms that don't turn out to be crazy injuries. That's not to discredit pain, because pain is still pain and it's a real experience and it needs explored. But if you have a painful injury, or what you assume is an injury, right? If you stop training, then when you get back into training, you feel that pain and you're going to go, oh crap, I am injured again. And there's this fear of injury, which is totally normal. And I experience it. Everybody experiences it. But that's going to heighten your pain response because your body says, oh, I have to avoid this pain. And then it's going to like lower that threshold of what's considered outside of normal range, and then that's going to come back. And the more you detrain and the more fear you build up, the more likely you are to experience that pain because you're looking for it, you're expecting it. And so sometimes just doing what we can to mitigate that fear and get rid of that fear. Sometimes I put in music just to distract myself from the scared emotion of still being injured, because then you make that mean a lot of things. You feel a little twinge. We've all done it. You feel a little twinge where you used to have an injury, and then all of a sudden it's like, I'm never going to train again. I'm never going to be able to run a 5K. I'm never going to be able to do any of this stuff that I want to do. My life is horrible, and it just spirals, right? And that's not helping you get better. It's completely valid and reasonable, and you're not bad for experiencing that because everybody experiences it, but that's not going to help you get better. And so it's reframing it of like, I feel this. This doesn't necessarily mean there's injury. This just means it's my body's experiencing something it's not used to. That could be an injury, but if you're coming back from an injury, your body is just experiencing something it's not used to, and it's created a fear response around because last time it felt this, there was something that kept you from doing what you love. And so just being cognizant of that can help, because you have a little bit of like what's the best way to say this? You have a little bit of Viktor Frankl says between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space, we have the power to decide how we're going to react, basically. I paraphrase that a little bit, but it gives you that pause. When you start to freak out, just knowing that this is a thing, you can pause and say, oh yeah, like, am I overreacting here? And that is super powerful. Just being able to pause and have that dialogue with yourself is super powerful for returning from an injury. Again, pain science and fear response around pain is super complex and a rabbit hole you could really go down. And it's something that's still, being explored and figured out. But avoid detraining, avoid fear. And then I've got avoid negative mental cycles like I went through. So doing what you can to stay motivated towards something. If you can't run anymore, can you sign up for a cycling race? Can you sign up for something else? Just anything to avoid those negative mental cycles from not training, because a lot of us are competitive. A lot of us like to train for things. And so doing what you can to avoid that. And lastly would be loss of momentum. So if you stop training, you really lose that momentum that you have, and momentum's hard to get back. I'm dealing with that right now. So if you can't run, like for me, you could cycle, just continuing to train every day, because I really fell out of regular training with a lot of the business growth I've been pushing and the lack of having a goal to train for. And so you definitely do not want to lose that momentum, because it's hard to get back. It's possible to get back, but it's not as easy. If you keep the momentum, then once the injury subsides, once you've worked through the injury, you can then just jump right back into training, and you don't have to rebuild that momentum because you're already training. You just modified it. You've, switched all your runs to cycling. And so you're still training 6 days a week. And so then you can slowly start to work running back in, instead of, okay, yeah, I trained 3 days a week because I got rid of all my running and I didn't replace it with cycling or swimming. And so then I just strength train 3 times a week. All right, so now I'm ready to get back running again. So now I have to get used to running on another day. So there's 4 days a week and then 5 days a week. And it's a lot more work to do that than it is to just keep the momentum of, I'm the person that trains 6 days a week or however often you train. And then you're able to kind of just get back into training after that. And so now the things to do. So those are things to avoid. And I kind of touched on these already, but cross train to avoid detraining. I already said that. And then the second thing, and the only other thing that I haven't really talked about that I wanted to talk about, is finding an entry point that you can handle. And so when it comes to running, when you're getting back into things, there is going to be pain. Running or any injury, there is going to be some pain. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. So I've already touched on this. I don't need to dive into this even more, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. And so learning to be okay with a little bit of pain while you're getting back into things and finding an entry point that's at a threshold you can handle. So you can say, a 4 out of 10 is the general recommendation that I give that's based off of Katie Dabrowski's recommendation. I really like that. And so I took that from her and I used that. If the pain is a 4 out of 10 or below, we're okay. If it goes above that, we need to modify. For each person, that can be a little different. If you have a little bit more fear around pain, maybe this is something you've dealt with for your whole life and you have a little bit more fear around it. Okay, let's say a 3 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10 and work with you there. And that's not a bad thing. That's just meeting people where they're at. If you tend to push yourself a little too hard, maybe lowering that as well, because you might tell yourself it's a 4 out of 10 when it's 8 out of 10, but you're just like, ready to get back to it. So you have to know yourself. And as a coach, it's important to know your athlete when you give that recommendation, or as a physical therapist or a doctor. But being okay with a little bit of pain when you get back to it and finding that entry point where you can train and kind of be at that threshold. So for me, that for a little while, that was literally a 2-mile run, which felt like nothing. But after 2 miles, things would start to hurt over that 4 out of 10 pain threshold. And now I've pushed that to 6 miles. Now I'm doing 6 miles, and there is a little bit of pain still every now and then, but it's below that 4 out of 10. I'm able to control myself and not go into this negative mental spiral that's going to actually make my foot hurt worse. And so really finding that entry point where you can still do the activity and then build up your tolerance for it. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these injuries that we deal with, it's just that our body wasn't ready for what we asked it to do. And so that's another thing Katie says, and I really love that. She says, God, I can't remember the exact quote, so I'm not going to butcher it, but our body just wasn't ready to do what we asked of it. So how do we scale back a little bit, find an entry point, and then build up our body's capacity through proper training, proper progression models, enough sleep, enough food, and then the mental tools like not freaking out when something hurts a little bit, but keeping it around that 4 out of 10 threshold. 4 out of 10 and below, this is safe, this is okay. We're pushing our body's capacity. Above 4 out of 10, okay, let's pull back until we get to that 4 out of 10 or below, and then progress, because your body's going to get stronger, your body's going to adapt. You're not going to be the same person you are today forever. You're going to adapt, get stronger, get fitter, and even if that's going to push that 4 out of 10 to a higher capacity, if that makes sense. So you're going to be able to do more at that level. So those are kind of the overview of things to avoid, things to do, and my experience. The last thing I wanted to talk about was where I'm going now. I hope so far this has been informative for you. I hope you've enjoyed it and hopefully taken some away. I feel like I've kind of been everywhere. Podcast back, so getting back into the swing of how things flow. But hopefully you can learn something from that experience, and hopefully what I'm about to say is also something that you can learn from. So lastly, what I would say is, so lastly, just where am I going from here? Lastly, just where am I going from here? So I've gotten injured 2 years in a row training for an ultramarathon. I really love ultramarathons. I really love ultra endurance in general, but it's been kind of a lose 2 years in a row. And so I want to do something fun, something challenging, but something that is a little less impact right now on my legs, because it seems that 2 years in a row, strength training, heavy strength training, which I still love and still want to do, combined with the ultramarathon training, has been a little much for my capacity. So I could commit and jump back into an ultra, but I don't want to stack a third year of loss, and that's something I'm worried about. Whether that's true or not, whether that's what would happen or not, I don't know, but I don't want to roll those dice right now. I want to get into something that's still a challenge for me, still something I don't know if I can do, but I feel like the risk for injury is a little bit lower for me. And then ultras in the future, definitely something I still want to do. There's a 50-miler in Colorado that I've been looking at that I would love to do in the future. But I think the smart decision right now is to push that off a little bit. So my next event that I've talked with a lot of people about in my life, and it's going to be a logistical challenge when it comes to timing because of how busy I am now. But it's something that I definitely want to get into, want to do for my own enjoyment, mental health, and I just want to push for something and really push myself. So there's a half Ironman that I would like to do in April in Oceanside, San Diego, which I love San Diego. So it's got a special place in my heart too. I lived there for a while. So there's a half Ironman in April. So that's a 1.2 mile swim, 56-mile bike, and a half marathon. Because a full Ironman is double that. So that's something that a half marathon after an Ironman is difficult, or after the swim and the bike is difficult, the half marathon. But it's not going to be that pounding on my legs. Like, I feel pretty confident even getting back from my injury. I could go right now and grit my teeth and run a half Ironman, even if my foot hurt. Run a half marathon, even if my foot hurt. So that distance there is pretty manageable for me from an impact perspective. I wouldn't do super well right now because I haven't trained for one, but I could go out and finish the distance. And I really, really love triathlons. I really love swimming. I really love cycling. Again, like I said, it's just going to be a logistical challenge around also pushing strength training just with my schedule. Definitely doable. It just takes a lot of intention and planning, which is something that I need to get better at anyways. And so by doing this, I'm going to make myself get better at that, because when it comes to any goal, the end goal is not, how do I want to say this? When it comes to any goal, like a half Ironman, like an Ironman, like an ultra marathon, the event itself is not where the magic is. The magic is in who you become on your way to that goal. Because in order to succeed at that goal, you have to become the type of person that can succeed at that goal. And so you don't have to be the type of person right now when you start training for it. That's the point of setting goals that are a little bit out of your reach, is you're going to become the type of person that can succeed at that goal. And that's what the magic is. The magic is not in finishing the event. The finishing the event, hitting your goal at the event, is the kind of culmination of all of that. And that's why there's a lot of motion around it. And that's why it feels so good, because it's proof that I have become this type of person over the last 6 months, 12 months, hell, 20 years of my life has led up to me becoming this type of person. And this is a person that I can be proud of. I can look myself in the mirror and be proud of this person. So it's not necessarily about the event. It's about who you become on the way to that event. And doing this half Ironman, I love triathlons. I really want to do it. It's in an area I love. It looks really beautiful. It looks really fun. I love pushing myself in that way. But there's some logistical challenges that I need to get figured out in order to do that. And those are things that I would like to figure out irrespective of this goal. And so doing this will be super fulfilling for me. It's something I really want to do, but it will also make me become the person that I want to be anyways, outside of this goal. So I'm going to leave you with that. It's a really powerful thing that I am really passionate about, because a lot of times people get really focused on the end goal, but the process is where the magic is. And I love the process, and fall in love with the process is what's going to make you truly happy with things. Because, I'm going to do this half Ironman. People are going to do their ultramarathons, their events, and then there's always another one. And so the goalposts always move, which I think is great. A lot of people think that's a negative, and it can be a negative if you let that control you and you're never happy because you're always shooting for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But if you can fall in love with the process in the middle, I'm a high achiever, so I'm always going to set the next thing. But if you can fall in love with the process to get there and love your life when in the process, in the work, in the becoming of the person that can do whatever goal you set, then you're not going to be miserable. But if you always look at the goal and you say, I'm unhappy until I get this goal, and then you get the next goal and you're unhappy until you get the next goal, you're always going to be unhappy, except for those fleeting moments where you actually finish the goal, those maybe 2 days after your event, maybe a week after your event, maybe even a month after your event. But that's such a small percentage of your life. And so you have to fall in love with the process, and you have to fall in love with the work of becoming the person that can do these things that you want to do. So yeah, that's where I'm going to leave you. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Hope you got something from it. Definitely leave your comments, ratings, reviews. If you have any questions, DM me on Instagram or send me an email. I'm guaranteed to see the email, not guaranteed to see the DM with the flood of DMs. But my Instagram and email will both be in the description. And again, if you liked it, please subscribe and share with a friend that could also enjoy and get stuff from this podcast. And send me your guest requests, or if you want to be a guest, I would love to talk to you. I love talking to people. I love building relationships and just learning more from people, whether you're in fitness or not. I think that you probably have something very valuable to share, whether you think you do or not, and I would love to talk to you about that. With that said, I'll see you guys in the next episode, and I hope you have a great rest of your week, rest of your day, and rest of your month until we talk again.